Every state's got that one city. You know the one. The city that makes the rest of the state collectively sigh every time it ends up in the headlines for crime, corruption, bankruptcy, or just being a cautionary tale for human forms. While every state has its bright spots, some cities feel like they're actively trying to drag the entire state into a pothole-ridden pit of dysfunction. Now I get it, cities will always look worse than the rest of the state. They have more people, which means higher population density, and when people live on top of each other, bad things happen. More people means more problems. But the cities on this list are overachievers when it comes to suckage compared to the rest of their state. So today we're looking at cities that are dragging the rest of their state down. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Jackson, Mississippi. Let's kick things off with Jackson, Mississippi's capital and living proof that even government money can't save you if the water doesn't work. The city's infrastructure is so bad that it made national headlines for having no running water. That's not an exaggeration. There were weeks where residents had to boil water just to brush their teeth or bathe. Not exactly ideal for a city that's supposed to represent the entire state. And then there's the crime. Yeah, it's high. The homicide rate was among the highest per capita in the country recently, and that's saying something when you're competing against places like Chicago, St. Louis, East St. Louis, and Stockton, California. The economy's not doing it any favors either. Businesses leave, tax revenues drop, and what's left behind is a whole lot of potholes and finger pointing. Jackson's dysfunction doesn't just affect the capital, it reflects poorly on the entire state, reinforcing everyday bad stereotypes about Mississippi. Now here's the two main stats that people are concerned with, the murder rate and the poverty rate. Mississippi's poverty rate is 17.7%, which is about 2.3 above the national average. Jackson's is 27.6. Yeah, that's rough. Mississippi's murder rate is only 7.9 for every 100,000 residents. That's really not a bad number. But if you look at Jackson, they're 44.24 for every 100,000 residents. Now, there's some good news there. In 2021, they were 98 per 100,000. So they're getting better. They still suck. Number 9, Detroit, Michigan. You knew Detroit was going to be on this list. The Motor City has become America's cautionary tale for what happens when industry leaves, and the follow-up plan is shrug and hope for the best. Now, like I say recently in all my videos, their downtown is turning it around. The rest of the city is still a nightmare. But bankruptcy? Yep. Mass exodus? Yeah. You bet. It's got it all. Abandoned houses, crumbling schools, all present and accounted for. Detroit has improved in recent years, like I said. But progress is uneven and slow. For every new downtown tech startup, there's still a block of 5 abandoned homes and a liquor store clinging on to life. And then there's schools. Their schools are a bit of a nightmare. The headline in Detroit this week is Mayor Dugan's $4.5 billion education plan includes firing unsuccessful principals and superintendents. And that's from the Detroit Free Press, and the reporter reporting on this, her name is Dana Afana. I hope that's how she pronounces it, because that's a really cool sounding name. It rhymes, Dana Afana, but it might be Dana Afana. I'm not sure. Michigan's identity is still partially tied to Detroit, whether it wants to admit it or not. And while the state touts its nature, lakes, and universities, Detroit looms large as a cautionary tale and centerpiece for urban collapse. And I won't even get into Flint, Michigan. Those two cities kind of share the black eye that Michigan has, or they each give Michigan a black eye. Now here's their numbers. The murder rate in Michigan is a respectable 5.9 for every 100,000 residents. Detroit's murder rate, 40.6 for every 100,000. Michigan's poverty rate is 16.3%, just a little over the national average. Detroit's 33.4%. Number 8, St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis is another city that feels like it's on a permanent downward slope. It's got an alarming high violent crime rate year after year. It ranks among the top 5 for most dangerous cities in the United States. The population has been shrinking for decades. Schools, struggling. Economy, depends on who you ask and where they live. On top of all the problems they have, they also got hit with a tornado like 2 weeks ago. And now they're finding out a lot of those homes weren't insured. So now they have their property and a pile of sticks. Missouri's trying to modernize its image with development in Kansas City and suburban growth, but St. Louis keeps dragging it back into the headlines with homicides, corruption, and protest-worthy police issues. Now, the divide between St. Louis County and the city itself is a microcosm of economic disparity and a failure to consolidate services or fix the fundamental problems, just making things worse. The whole state's perception suffers because of it. Now, here's their numbers. Missouri's murder rate is 9.1 for every 100,000 residents. It's not the best, but it's not terrible. St. Louis, on the other hand, is 56.5 for every 100,000. Ouch. Missouri's poverty rate is actually a little above the national average, which is 14.5, depending on what month it is. But right now, theirs is 14.9, so that's not terrible. St. Louis poverty rate, though, is 21.4. Number 7, Wilmington, Delaware. If you only know Wilmington from the Amtrak station President Biden uses, you're probably getting the best possible version of the city. And even that comes with a heavy police presence. Once you leave the train platform and venture into the actual city, the story gets rough fast. Despite being Delaware's largest city, Wilmington feels like a cautionary tale about what happens when crime, poverty, and economic stagnation set up camp and never leave. It has one of the highest per capita homicide rates in the country. That's per capita, meaning for its small size, Wilmington is punching way above its weight class in the crime department. The city has struggled for decades with concentrated poverty, failing schools, and a tax base that keeps leaking like an old pipe. Meanwhile, the rest of Delaware, tiny as it is, tries to pitch itself as a haven for corporate headquarters and beachside retirement. Wilmington basically stomps all over that message in muddy boots. In short, Wilmington is like that one kid in class who keeps tanking the group project grade while still insisting everything is fine. Delaware would love to shine, but Wilmington keeps dimming the lights. Now, normally I would tell you about a news article that's going on right now that's negative to kind of, show you how bad the city is, but it's a bunch of shootings and some of them include children, so we won't discuss that. Their stats. The Delaware murder rate is only 3.5 for every 100,000 residents. That's not bad. Wilmington, on the other hand, 21.5. This is a small city. Delaware's poverty rate is 4.2%, which is not bad. Wilmington is 25.9%. Actually, Delaware's poverty rate is outstanding. 4.2%, that is great. Number 6, Baltimore. Baltimore is a city of contradictions. It's got elite hospitals, renowned universities, and sky-high crime. In fact, it has one of the highest homicide rates in the U.S., with entire swaths of the city in a state of semi-permanent emergency. Politically and financially, Baltimore has been mismanaged for decades. Corruption scandals? Check. School system dysfunction? Check. Infrastructure issues? You bet. And every time Baltimore makes national headlines, Maryland collectively winces. It's a heavy drag on the state's image, economy, and morale. And it doesn't help that tourists' main knowledge of the city is either from that HBO show The Wire or news clips featuring boarded up row houses and collapsing public housing. This should be no surprise to anyone that Baltimore's just dragging Maryland down. They have so many shootings in Baltimore that even the rabbis are pulling guns on people. Yeah, some rabbi almost got carjacked. He pulled out a piece on the guy. Here's their numbers. Maryland's murder rate is 3.4 for every 100,000 residents. Baltimore's murder rate, 41.2 for every 100,000 residents. Maryland's poverty rate is 7.9%, and Baltimore's poverty rate is 21.9. Yeah, that's rough. Number 5, Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was once a thriving steel town, but that was a few recessions ago. Now it's a city fighting poverty, disinvestment, and an exodus of residents like the building is on fire. The city leads Alabama in crime and economic decline, and the downtown revitalization efforts haven't done much for the struggling neighborhoods it surrounds. Birmingham used to be the heartbeat of Alabama's economy. Now it's more like the back pain the state can't shake. Alabama wants to project a pro-business image, attract industry, and talk about a new automotive plant. But every time people look at Birmingham's crumbling neighborhoods and low-performing schools, the whole New South narrative takes a hit. Birmingham's another place where their news is just all about shootings. These two geniuses decided to shoot up a party at an Airbnb because their robbery didn't go right. Here's their numbers. Alabama's murder rate is 10.2 per every 100,000 residents. Birmingham, 62.5. The poverty in Alabama is a little above average, which is 15.9%. And Birmingham's poverty rate, almost 25% of their population. 24.7% of their population lives below the poverty line. Number 4, Gary, Indiana. Gary is like a sad industrial ghost story that refuses to end. Once a booming steel town, much like Birmingham, is now the poster child for Rust Belt ruin. Population has plummeted from over 175,000 in the 1960s to around 66,000 today. That's just the city, that's not the metro area. The city is absolutely peppered with abandoned buildings, shuttered schools, and economic hopelessness. Gary isn't just dragging down Indiana's numbers, it's practically redefining them. While the rest of the state tries to sell itself as an affordable, business-friendly place, Gary shows up like an awkward uncle at a Thanksgiving, reminding everyone about the good old days that never came back. Indiana tries to boost cities like Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and Bloomington, but Gary's perpetual decay puts a hard cap on how good the state's stats can ever look. Here's Gary's numbers. Indiana's murder rate is only 5.6 for every 100,000 residents. Gary's, 69.7. Indiana's poverty rate is about 14.9%, and in Gary, it's 33.2%. Number 3, Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland gets this high on the list because, despite decades of attempted revitalization, it's still one of the most economically depressed, crime-ridden, and publicly struggling cities in the country. And it has some of the worst poverty rates, educational outcomes, and infrastructure conditions of any large city in the US. They're just happy their river doesn't catch fire anymore. Yeah, that really happened. Not the docks, not the boats caught fire, well they did, but the water actually caught fire at one point because it was so polluted. Ohio's economic metrics often look decent on paper, but subtract Cleveland and they look way better. That's how big city drag is. The city's ongoing population decline and inability to hold on to young professionals doesn't help either. Cleveland has sports teams, a decent food scene, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but none of that distracts from the boarded up buildings, crumbling roads, and neighborhoods in deep decline. The city's like a pothole that never gets fixed, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. Here's their numbers. Ohio's murder rate is 3.1 for every 100,000 residents. Respectable. Cleveland's murder rate, on the other hand, is 38.8 for every 100,000 residents. Poverty rate in Ohio is 15.4%. Cleveland's poverty rate is 32.4%, living below the poverty line. That's a lot of people. Number 2, East St. Louis, Illinois. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, why isn't Chicago on this list yet? Are they number 1? We'll get to that in a minute. But we're talking about East St. Louis, not to be confused with the more famous neighbor across the river, which isn't doing great, but definitely better than East St. Louis. East St. Louis is where optimism goes to die. It's got some of the worst poverty, crime, and urban decay rates in the country. And it's tiny, which somehow makes the disaster feel more concentrated. It regularly competes for the worst crime rates in the nation. Its schools have been under state control, and basic services are spotty at best. For Illinois, a state already carrying the weight of Chicago's complex issues, East St. Louis is like a second anchor chain on its ankle. Every time East St. Louis hits the news, it confirms all the worst assumptions about Illinois: urban management, fiscal problems, and social services. In terms of per capita damage to a state's reputation, East St. Louis almost takes the top spot. Let's look at their numbers. The Illinois murder rate is only 6.2 for every 100,000 residents. That's okay. East St. Louis, on the other hand, is 71.5 for every 100,000 residents. Illinois' poverty rate, 13.9%. East St. Louis, 30.7%. All right, before we get to number 1, I always get asked about certain cities whenever we bring up a list like this, and why aren't they on there? Always accuse me of bias, especially because I don't bring up Los Angeles, where I grew up, or Portland, where I currently live now. I live in the outskirts, actually. And of course, everyone's favorite punching bag, Chicago. So here's their numbers. The state of Illinois' murder rate is 6.2, like we just learned with East St. Louis. Chicago's is 19 for every 100,000 residents. When you're looking at the rate, it's respectable. Yes, and I understand Chicago has more murders than just about any other place, but as we've discussed many, many times before, They have so many people, the rate isn't that bad. When you look at their poverty rate, that again, it's not that bad. Illinois has a poverty rate of 13.9%, and Chicago's is only 17.3%. Again, not bad. There's a whole lot of city that's not Southside Chicago. Now let's take a look at Portland. The overall murder rate in Oregon is 4.5 for every 100,000 residents. The murder rate in Portland, Oregon is 11.8. That is less than a third of what most of these cities have. When you look at their poverty rate, Oregon's is 15.7%, Portland's 13.1. It's actually better than the state, and that's because the east side of the state is got a lot of poverty. Not that many people out there, but they got a lot of poverty. All right, now let's look at Los Angeles. California's murder rate is 5.0 for every 100,000 residents. Los Angeles, 8.6. Again, they have some murders, they have some crime, but they got a lot of people. When you look at their poverty rate, California's is 15.8% and Los Angeles is 16.9%. Again, not that bad. Both really close to average. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, if you guys haven't subscribed, please do so. If you like what we're doing here, give the video a big thumbs up. On to number 1. And number 1, Camden, New Jersey. Yes, it's our old friend Camden, New Jersey. New Jersey is a mixed bag. It's got wealthy suburbs, shore towns, and then it's got Camden. It's been the poster child for urban decay for decades. Camden has a kind of reputation that makes other New Jersey city go, well, at least we're not Camden. Camden's industrial complex collapsed in the mid-20th century, and it created a vacuum that sucked in poverty, unemployment, and crime. At one point, it was so dangerous that the entire police force was disbanded and replaced by county-run operations. Crime dropped, but not enough to make people move in. What Camden does best is make New Jersey's already battered public image look even worse. The state tries to put on a good face and shake that reputation of dangerous and Jersey Shore. But Camden works overtime trying to make it look bad. Here's their numbers. The New Jersey murder rate is 9.7 for every 100,000 residents. In Camden, it's 44.2. New Jersey poverty rate is 10.9%, which is respectable, and it's below the national average. Camden, on the other hand, is 33%. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.